This video is for anyone who really wants to be songwriting, but constantly finds themselves either not finding enough time to songwrite or in a situation where they say, I just don't have time to songwrite. How do I make the time? How do I find the time? What do I do if I'm really passionate about songwriting, but I still can't seem to find the time? Let's talk about it. Specifically for this video, I want to give you solutions for your problem of not finding enough time or not being able to make enough time to songwrite. We're gonna start with the most extreme circumstance and then work ourselves down into where probably most of us are, which is in the area of I have time to songwrite, but I feel like I just don't have big enough pools of time, or I feel like I have certain time per day to songwrite, but it's never quite enough. I can't quite get into the zone. But first, let's start with the most extreme. If you are currently watching this video saying, I have no time to songwrite. It's been months since I've been able to get any time to songwrite whatsoever. The first thing I need to ask with that is, do you really not have time? Because for most things in life, you can always make time for the things that are most important. For example, are you getting your full 8 hours of sleep a night? Can you maybe make it 7.5 hours of sleep and sacrifice that half hour? For a lot of my life, I've lived off of 6 hours of sleep in the name of being able to have time to do all the things I really want to do. And honestly, I kind of got used to 6 hours sleep. It's not so bad. So that's one of the first areas you can look. And of course, the obvious things, right? I almost don't want to bring them up, but I guess I have to, right? We're talking about how to make time for this. So if you do find yourself watching TV, watching Netflix, watching sports, the NBA Finals just finished, if you found yourself watching that, or if you're playing video games or anything else, those are all things that you absolutely can just cut out and replace with songwriting. You do have time. You're just choosing to spend your time on something different. But beyond that, if you really are in a circumstance where maybe you have kids to take care of, you're doing multiple jobs, and you're really in a state where you're already barely getting 5 hours of sleep a night, how is it that you can find time during the day to songwrite when there seems to be no time to find? Something that I found really helpful is really learning to look at things as, is this a thing that takes brain power, or is it just something that I need to be present for? I would argue that while you're in the car, while you are occupied with your hands and your attention as far as looking at the road, it is a time that you could put your phone up and you could hit the record button and just improvise melodies, right? So for example, if you're somebody that normally, while you're in the car, you listen to music or you listen to podcasts, which is something that I like to do when I'm in the car, and you have a commute every day, that's, say you have a 15-minute commute one way to work, that's half an hour a day that you have where, yes, you have to pay attention to the road, and no, you shouldn't be writing lyrics or writing anything physically, but that is a time that you could even just sit in silence to dwell on what you could write about, sort of philosophize with yourself and think about life or whatever it is that gets you starting to think about what songs you could write. Maybe start improvising lyrics out loud, just saying words. See if you find a lyric or a song idea or a song title that you really like, or just improvise melodies by humming, right? Lots of people sing in the shower, so why can't you do it in the car? Speaking of singing in the shower, maybe the shower might be the right place to do it for you, but hey, if you're too embarrassed by doing that, there's tons of other things that sometimes we have to do in our lives where really we can do a second thing while doing it. So to go back to the TV example, if you are watching some TV, that's something that you can combine with actually practicing guitar. This is something I've done very often because sometimes I find myself thinking, do I really have time to make videos like these, do the Songwriter Theory podcast as well? Of course, I have my day job, I have a wife and other relationships to maintain with friends, parents, etc. I do rental real estate, so I do a whole bunch of things. So how do I find time every day to make sure to still work on my two instruments that I play, which is the piano and the guitar? One of the things that I found that's really helpful for the guitar is actually, hey, there is time every day that I do choose to spend to sort of unwind a little bit, maybe watch some TV, which usually is on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Right now I'm really into Shark Tank, for example. Something good that you can do is you can actually kind of mindlessly practice scales while you're watching something and still really enjoy that thing. Maybe you are doing the dishes or the laundry. These are all things that, yes, maybe you can't physically write anything, but most of music writing isn't doing that anyway. So figure out what are the things you can do that works towards your songwriting while you are doing other things. Now, the category of not having enough time to songwrite that most of us probably find ourselves in is a little less extreme, is the situation where maybe each day or each week we don't have enough concentrated time to be able to sort of, quote, get in the zone. So for example, if you do have enough time to maybe be songwriting 15 minutes a day or half an hour a day or even an hour 3 times a week, you may be in a scenario where sure, you have time to songwrite, but you never feel like you have quite enough time to really dive in and get into songwriter mode. You sort of feel like you're always just getting into it, and then by the time you're kind of starting to feel it and really get into it, you already have to stop. So if we think practically about that, there's really 2 ways to fix that problem. One is to learn how to get into the zone quicker so that if you do have half an hour a day and you feel like you never get in the zone within that half hour, okay, how can we maybe learn to get into the zone within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes, so that the last 20 minutes or the last 25 minutes of that time is actual productive songwriting time where you really feel like you are in the zone and you're not just skimming the surface. Now, one practical way to do that is object writing, which comes from Pat Pattison. If you haven't read the book Writing Better Lyrics, I'll put a link in the description. I have a whole video about it as well. I really highly recommend this book. It's a really, really good book, especially from the lyrical side of things. And one of the cool things he came up with was the idea of object writing, which the basic idea of it is that you spend 10 minutes per day, exactly, no more, no less, and you do it first thing in the morning, where you sort of just pick an object. So for example, I am looking at a camera right now. I could take camera as my object, and then for 10 minutes, I would write describing the camera, and then wherever else my mind goes for 10 minutes exactly, no more, no less. And then I would describe it using all of my senses, because the root of emotions in songwriting and the root of really making a connection with the listener is usually rooted in those senses. And the whole idea behind this that Pat Pattison came up with is really to get you in the morning to turn on your, quote, creator brain, which I found to be a very, very true thing. The earlier in the day you get your creative brain awake, then you have the creative brain all throughout the day that can sort of catch different things. Maybe, for example, if your coworker says something that would inspire your creative brain, but your creative brain's not on yet. You woke up at 10 o'clock, barely got into work by 10:30. Somebody says something at 11. You haven't had your coffee yet. Your creator brain might not pick up on that, but you get up a little bit earlier. You do some object writing. You might be in creator mode where now you're just trying to figure out, and everything that you see, everything that you hear is sort of something that you're picking up not only with your normal brain, but also with your creator brain. But if you're not really interested in trying object writing, other things you can do, sort of going back to what I was talking about before, is find times where maybe you're doing something that you don't really need to do, like for example, listening to a podcast during your commute, or maybe while you're in the shower you tend to, I don't know, listen to music. Maybe decide to not do those things and take those as just times of silence, because you really want to erase all the external noise. And in this case, it even can mean literal noise, right? Literal noise is something that distracts us. When you hear music, you probably are singing or humming along and you're thinking about the lyrics of that song, and that song already exists. When you're listening to a podcast, you're thinking about the different problems that they're solving or whatever they're talking about. Maybe you're watching The Office Ladies and you're thinking about The Office because that's what they're talking about. Or maybe you are listening to a podcast like, for example, the Songwriter Theory podcast, shameless plug, I guess, where I'm talking about songwriting. And that stuff is all good, but at some point you need silence to just be able to think and allow your mind to sort of drift into creative, thoughtful, pensive places. Another thing you can do to really maximize having smaller intervals of time to work on songwriting is to break songwriting down into different steps. Now for this, specifically for lyrics, I think songwriters have a big problem with trying to do too much all in one step. Sometimes people seem to try to write lyrics just in one step, right? They just look at a blank sheet and write lyrics. But I actually break lyric writing down into 6 steps. And if you're interested in that, I do have a free guide. Link will be in the description for my 6-step lyric writing checklist that breaks it down into smaller pieces that are much easier to do even just in small doses. So for example, one of the steps is really just gathering song seeds. Sometimes I literally will just take 10-15 minutes and write down all the different song ideas, song concepts, different maybe symbols or symbolisms that I want to be able to use, imagery that I want to be able to use. And sometimes I'll just write different quotes that I think are interesting or inspirational. Sometimes I'll even write words that I think are interesting. Maybe I'll go to a thesaurus and be like, oh, that's an interesting word that I think I kind of want to use in a song. Another thing that I do is probably my favorite of those 6 steps is iterative lyric editing. Specifically, if you have a lyric that is kind of at the place where you're like, well, I have a verse or I have a chorus, but I'm not super happy with how it all comes together. Iterative lyric editing is all about taking things at one section at a time, and then one line at a time, and even one word at a time, where you just take a word and then you look up that word in the thesaurus and see if there's actually a better word, right? Like the word good is not really something that's a very visceral word, or say love, right? There's a big difference between I love you and I adore you, right? Adore is very, very specific, whereas love is very generic. I could be talking about ice cream, I could be talking about my dog, my wife, or my mother with the word love, whereas adore is a little bit more specific and has more meaning. And the last thing that I would recommend, if you are just a person that it's not so much that you came to this video because you think you don't have time, but you're struggling with making time, and you recognize that you have time. It's not that you need help discovering time. You know you're doing video games 2 hours a day. You know that you are spending a lot of time watching Netflix. I know I'm picking on those two in those videos, but you know what I mean. So maybe you're in that scenario where you're just thinking, I just can't bring myself to songwrite as much as I'd like to, but I think I love songwriting. It's just sometimes I have a hard time starting. And the truth is, I think we all experience that sometimes. And I found the key to getting into it is really just momentum, and you get momentum by songwriting, and you get yourself to songwrite by prioritizing songwriting. So how do you prioritize something? I think priority really comes down to 2 things. 1, how early you do it, and B, how long you do it, right? If you think about what you prioritize in your life, what people would say you prioritize in your life are the 2 things, right? What do you do early? What do you make sure you do every day, or you make sure you do every week? Those are the things you prioritize, and also the things you prioritize are the things you spend a lot of time on. So if you spend a lot of time talking to your spouse, that shows you prioritize them. If the first thing you do in the morning is you make sure to work out before doing anything else, you're prioritizing working out. So in the same way, maybe for songwriting, what you need to do is wake up a little bit earlier and prioritize doing some songwriting before you start your day. Or maybe what you need to do is just to expand the amount of time that you do spend on songwriting. But what I recommend here is don't wait till late at night if you're not already in the songwriting zone. If you find yourself constantly just choosing not to songwrite, what I highly recommend is for you to make sure as soon as you're done with work, maybe if you have a workout or something else that you really feel the need to do, dinner, that's all fine, but try to get to songwriting as quickly as possible, because by time late night comes around, which for you might be 8 o'clock or 12 o'clock, whenever that is, by the time that time comes around, the call of things like TV and all the other stuff that's just relaxing and doesn't take any effort is going to be overwhelming next to the call to do songwriting, because songwriting does take some energy to start doing, right? It's creative. It takes brain power. It takes attention span. Whereas for, say, TV, you can just sit there and watch and just sort of drift off to sleep, right? It doesn't take much energy to start. So because it takes some energy to start songwriting, be sure to do it earlier while you still have that energy to set yourself up for success, for actually making the time and therefore prioritizing songwriting. If you found this video helpful, be sure to drop a like. It helps me out with the YouTube algorithm, and leave me a comment down below. Let me know which of these are you struggling with, or which one of these tips resonated with you the most that you're going to try, that you're going to use to hopefully solve the problem that you're dealing with. And be sure to grab that 6-step lyric writing checklist in the description below that I mentioned at songwritertheory.com/lyric checklist if you are interested in being able to break lyric writing down into different parts so that each part is not so overwhelming, and it sets you up for much better success, and it sets you up for better efficiency as well, because there are smaller, easier to accomplish parts rather than trying to do too much all at the same time and ending up usually doing almost nothing or just getting lackluster results. If you do grab it and you find yourself in a position where right now you have a song where the lyrics are written, but you just don't feel super satisfied with it, be sure to go to step, I believe it's 5, where I talk about iterative lyric editing. This is probably the most helpful part, at least for me personally, of the whole checklist. This has revolutionized my songwriting the most of any of the steps. I love, love, love this step. It goes so far as to edit your lyric word by word by going to a thesaurus to figure out better, more precise words, more visceral words that you can use. I find it super, super helpful, and hopefully you will as well. Thank you for watching. I appreciate every single one of you, and I'll talk to you next time.